Hello. My name is Kamel. I'm CEO and co-founder of Contango. Contango is an exchange bringing expirable futures in DeFi. And today we're going to tackle several points. We're going to talk about the mechanism behind Contango with zero coupon bonds. We're also going to talk about integration with other mechanics such as yield stripping and interest rate swap. This is in relation with the different panels we had today. This morning we had yield stripping, and this afternoon we had interest rate swap. So it's interesting to see how we can build on top of these protocols. Why expirable futures matter? If we look at the volume in 2021, we have around 6% of the total crypto volume only on expirable futures. And this is a market of 7 trillion. So I guess you're well aware of what happened to FTX recently in CeFi. FTX, if you don't know, is the acronym for Futures Exchange. And they mainly offer expirable futures. So now we expect a lot of actors to come into DeFi to trade this kind of instruments. But interestingly, this doesn't really exist yet in DeFi. This is a market map from Jump Capital that put Contango as the only player into the DeFi expirable segment. They're dead. So, how does Contango work? We're going to go through a very simple example. We are using the main formula of financial engineering called the interest rate parity, which says that to price an expirable futures, what you need to do, or to replicate the cash flow of an expirable future, if you want to go long ETH DAI for an expiry, let's say in 3 months, what you do is that you borrow DAI for an expiry in 3 months, you swap this DAI for ETH, and you lend ETH. Both borrowing and lending occurring at a fixed rate. Let's spice it up. Those are the very simple steps. But what the protocol really do is a flash swap. So here we're going to inverse the steps, meaning that we're going to get ETH first. We're going to lend those ETH, get the zero coupon bond presentation of this lending, use this zero coupon bond to borrow zero coupon bond DAIs, swap those for DAIs, and then end the flash swap by giving the money to Uniswap. Okay, so we use both the trader collateral in DAI in this case, plus the money that we have borrowed to end the flash swap. Those steps are quite important because we're going to see how we use them in new constructions. But because we like taking risk, we're going to show you how this works in an example of Contango. This is a version deployed in Arbitrum with Yield protocol. And what we're going to do is to open a long position on ETH DAI for a size of 0.2 ETH. We put some collateral and we execute this transaction. You can see that despite of all the steps that we're doing, the gas fee is very low. It's around like 15 cents. The transaction is being mined. And here you go. We have opened our first long position on the futures on Arbitrum. And what I would like to better show is the transaction itself. So here we are going to see the different steps to create this synthetic futures position. And as we mentioned before, the first line is the flash swap from Uni. On the second line, we do the lending at a fixed rate, and we get this FYEs token. We reimburse or we honor the flash swap to Uni with the collateral that we have set in the UI. In the fourth line, we're doing the borrowing of FYUSDC by using this FYEs as collateral. And on the last line, we finish to honor the flash swap with the remaining money to Uni. So, if we go back to the presentation, I'm going to now switch to other constructions, and we're going to start with yield stripping. So for yield stripping, the concept is quite interesting. Basically, you put as an LP some money on this protocol, and the protocol does the stripping between what we call a principal token and a yield token. So with the principal token, you can have a fixed rate, and with the yield token, you can have a variable rate. So basically, we have this separation between fixed and variable coming from money markets, such as Aave or Compound. So the interesting question is, how do we integrate with this? And especially like with this kind of protocols, we had Swivel this morning, AP Wine, and Sense Finance. And here the steps are quite similar to what we saw in the flash swap. So first we get ETH from Uni, then we land it at a fixed rate. For the yield stripping protocols, this is equivalent to buy a principal token. And then we go on the money market, and ideally, what we would love to do is to be able to borrow DAI by using this principal token as collateral. And when you do that, you're borrowing at a variable rate. And this is where you go on the yield stripping protocol, buy the yield token to make your borrowing at a variable rate a fixed rate one. Okay? And once you have done all that, with the money you have borrowed and the trader collateral, you honor the flash swap as we've seen before. It looks easy, but there are different challenges for integration. And one of them being that this P token is not recognized as collateral on money markets such as Aave or Compound. This morning, very interestingly, we heard that there are some projects to have an ERC20, a token standard for the principal token, which will allow indeed to have this kind of mechanism. So this is where we're pushing again the boundaries of DeFi. Now I'm going to switch to interest rate swaps. Here the mechanic is quite straightforward. Basically, you could swap a fixed rate against a variable one or do the opposite. So if you're a fixed taker, you can go on interest rate swap pool and give the promise to give the fixed rate against receiving a variable rate. So for example, on the borrowing rate of Compound or Aave, you can define a fixed rate. And you can also do the opposite. You could like bring the variable and receive a fixed. And this use case where Contango is interested in is to bring the variable and exchange that for fixed, because we always need a fixed rate to price futures. The two only protocols at the moment are IPOR and Volts. And they also have their own set of challenges. So this time we will still get ETH from a flash swap. We will land those at a variable rate, but then we will go on the interest rate swap and swap the variable for a fixed rate. Then you would borrow DAI at a variable rate, again go on the interest rate swap to have a fixed rate borrowing. And then you will get the money you've borrowed plus the trader collateral to honor the flash swap. So the same thing as before. The interesting thing here is that you do not need to use any token representing a lending position to be able to borrow. Okay. These interest rate swaps are super capital efficient. You can just get some money in ETH terms for the fixed rate lending, and or here in DAI to do the fixed rate borrowing. So the integration is a bit more straightforward and already doable in this case, but we have more steps than the vanilla integration that we have at the moment. So we can close this presentation by looking at a summary. What we have here, it's the zero coupon bond one. So this is already the integration that we have with yield and notional. So you can see that when we do the borrowing, we have a collateralization ratio of 140%, which translates to around 3.5x leverage on Contango. Here you can have cross-collateral, meaning that you can use the token from lending as collateral to borrow. So this setup is doable. The complexity is quite medium. You saw that we did a lot of transactions. And the gas cost is quite cheap in layer 2, but it starts to be expensive in layer 1. I'm making the point that this is a medium and for complexity and gas cost because I'm thinking about layer 1 integration, given that yield stripping and interest rate swaps at the moment, they are only available in layer 1. Now, if we look at yield stripping, you could borrow with a 130% collateralization ratio, but you have to reserve some money to do the transaction on the P token and the Y token. So globally, even if you have a better collateralization ratio, you still have a leverage of 3.5x, but there is a blocker already there. You cannot do that now because we cannot borrow against the lending token on Aave or Compound. This is not possible at the moment. And another construction that you could do is to try to go on something like yield or notional and have the principal token being recognized on these protocols to borrow against them. But again, neither notional or yield recognize them. The only potential solution is to go on something like Fiat DAO, where they recognize the P token to borrow fiat as a currency, but the liquidity is quite low. So we don't have a lot of use cases, especially for trading houses. That's the institutional sides of crypto that we're targeting first for their needs. There, the complexity and the gas cost is quite high because you need to do way more transaction and it costs a lot of money because we're still in layer 1. Now, interest rate swaps, same thing. You have a collateralization ratio of 130% when you borrow at a variable rate from Compound or Aave, but you still need to reserve some money in the swaps themselves to get a fixed rate from the variable rates. So we still come back to a leverage of 3.5. We have to keep in mind that the CeFi counterparties, or at least the CeFi exchanges, they have quite high leverage. They have like 20x leverage, 50x leverage on expirable futures. So if we want to build comparable products, we need to work together as the community, the industry, to lower this collateralization ratio in this kind of construction. We believe that going to 110% to give 11x leverage is something really doable. Even if we push the boundaries on layer 2s, maybe even 105% to get to 20x. So there is good hope to get there. But we have to work together to reach this goal. On the cross-collateral, it's not really needed because you reserve some money. You don't need to use the lending token, so this works. But the complexity and the gas costs remain quite high. And the complexity, now we have different moving parts. You have to handle potential liquidation on different systems. You have to handle the liquidation on Aave or Compound on the money market, but also on the interest rate swap if you don't have enough margin. And you also have two positions on the interest rate swap. You have one for borrowing and one for lending. So you have to manage and monitor three potential liquidation there. But this is DeFi. We're building stuff that have never existed before. Here with Contango, we're tapping into the liquidity of all these protocols. And like you can imagine, like we could have the liquidity of something like Aave or Compound. And from the first numbers we have, we can see that only with the integration with Notional, we have something very similar to the liquidity of someone like Binance. So the more protocols we integrate, the deeper liquidity we're going to have. And this is clearly our goal. We want to have the deepest liquidity across any expirable futures, but for both DeFi and CeFi. And giving all that's happening at the moment, we need to bring that to the world. We need to bring that to our users. So we have seen different construction. One that is already working on Arbitrum. Two that we're working toward. So here we are. Thank you for following. I'm going to take some questions, if any. Questions? Yes.
I do have a question. And you began your by the way, awesome. It's really amazing what you're doing. And you began your presentation saying, like, okay, we have perpetuals, but we don't have the fixed futures that we were used to in, for example, FTX, which is dead, by the way, as you pointed out. How would the fixed part work in this? I mean, how do you get like a due date?
So in the construction we have at the moment, we're using the fixed rate markets to borrow and lend, and these markets already give you predefined maturities. So we're building our products with the currencies they already have for borrowing and lending and the maturity they have.
Okay, so you have to adapt your products and the position that users can take to the maturity of the fixed rates.
Yes.
And that's Element, Finance, and some others that you mentioned, right?
So fixed rate for both borrowing and lending at the moment with the zero coupon bond mechanism is Notional Finance and Yield Protocol. And we have a first integration with Yield Protocol on Arbitrum. Element Finance is on the part with yield stripping.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay.
Is it just as a question? So you're dependent on the underlying protocol for the duration.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, like, if you had the ability to control that, would you choose different durations based on the needs of the people trading it?
Yes. We know that one of the main use cases that the trading houses are asking for is to match traditional maturities such as the CME, because they're doing a lot of market making of options, and they would love to use expirable futures to hedge their positions. So that's the kind of maturity they're asking for. And indeed, this is an issue. Like, we don't have a standard of maturities across the different protocols we have in DeFi. And even like between Notional and Yield, they don't have the same expiry date and time. And this is challenging, but I know Julian from Swivel is trying to work on this problem and trying to standardize all that. Yes?
Just because you mentioned it,
Yeah, so we can get it on the recording as well.
all right, okay. Just because you mentioned it, it sounds like you've done some potential user interviews. You said the market makers, the institutions. So question one, is your product more geared towards institutions? And then question two, just because you said it, do you think that expirable futures will also finally help DeFi option markets to take off because market makers can hedge?
Interesting questions. So we are targeting at the start these trading houses because we know their need for hedging mainly, and also for building like specific products such as cash and carry on leverage. And we know how to target them. So we also know that retail, they don't really like expiries, especially in DeFi space, and this is why perpetuals have taken off. But the way that we understand that we're going to target retails is to be able to build products on top of Contango. Something I forgot to mention before is that on the transaction, indeed, on Etherscan, you can see that we got an NFT transferred to the wallet, and this NFT represents your futures position. And from there, we can allow DeFi composability. We can allow other products to build on top of us, especially like votes. And these votes are more like easier product for retails to use. So you can imagine farming a project and at the same time hedging with Contango, and then having a vote that will give you a fixed APY for a given maturity, and this a retail user can come and just put money there and have nothing to do. So we expect to have retail, but not directly with Contango, but more with a layer of abstraction to remove the complexity.
Yeah, and then the second question was around DeFi options, because people always point out that at the moment you can't, or market makers can't really hedge themselves. I don't know how specifically they hedge, but are expirable futures an essential building block for options hedging? Do you know?
Yes, indeed. Like if you have the same maturities, like when you're market making options, you need to have a hedge for the same maturity ideally, so you don't have any risk, you're delta neutral. And where it's very important is that with expirable futures, you know exactly how much you pay from the start. There is no surprise, so you can market make and be confident about your hedge. If you use a perp, you have a funding fee being charged 8 hours, maybe play in your favor, you receive money, but maybe the market crashes and you're long and you lose shit ton of money, and you don't have this predictability for your hedge. So if you can offer more tools for traders to be able to predict their costs, indeed this is like super important for DeFi to have the right tools to have a more efficient market. Any other question? Cool.
I have another question.
Yes.
So you mentioned the delta neutral positions, but my expectation would be that at the beginning the opportunities of doing arbitrage with delta neutral position are going to be high, and then like with time that's going to go like lower and balance. And how I was just curious about how do you envision that process in the long term?
That would be a very great thing. So, indeed, we're gonna have like some opportunities, and I can give an example of a delta neutral position with Contango. You could have a futures on ETH DAI on notional. You could have a futures on ETH DAI on yield protocol. So if there is any difference in the interest rate, that would mean that there would be a difference of price. And what you can do is to go long on the lowest price, for example, notional, and go short on the futures on yields. And that's delta neutral because you don't have any market exposure. So at the start, the rate may be very big, as you mentioned. But as we move toward a more mature industry, it means that this delta is going to be lower, but that would mean that you would have more volume. But that would also mean that users, when they go on any of these protocols, they will be ensured to get the best rate. They would not have to check all the marketplaces. Okay, so it's like you're selling like milk bottles, and like at the start there is only 2 players and they don't look at each another, and there is a big difference of price. They can keep selling one at the high price and the other one at the low price. But if you have a player that come and say, okay, you know what, I buy from you at the lowest and I go sell to the other one, then you keep the market at equilibrium. So any person purchasing milk will get the best price in the two stores, and they will not have to compare prices everywhere. So this is a very positive impact for DeFi and our industry in general.
I love the metaphor. Last question, and I promise I'm done. Your last slide, you were showing some missing parts of the puzzle. What's your expectation? Like, when could we expect those parts, those pieces, to be there so we can keep building?
So it depends on standardization, right? We know that someone like Aave or Compound is not necessarily going to recognize any specific token from any protocol without like really a governance vote. So I think that the idea of having a standard for a P token is super important, and we can move forward and then make a proposal. That's for the yield stripping part. For interest rate swaps, it's more straightforward because we have all the pieces, but we need to stick them together. And it's something that we're actively working on, but these protocols are quite young. They have a lot of requests from different also projects to iterate on the V2, V3, and it's a matter of time before we get there. So we're a really good hub. First we go with zero coupon bonds, and then we keep building. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you for listening.